The last shovel of dirt hit Dad's coffin with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through my chest. I stood there in my only good suit, watching my brothers Marcus and Jake shake hands with neighbors, accepting condolences like they were the only sons who mattered. The September wind cut through the cemetery, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. "Thanks for coming, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said, his voice carrying that politician's warmth he'd perfected in the city. Dad would have appreciated it. I wanted to laugh. Dad would have appreciated honesty, something Marcus had forgotten years ago when he traded his work boots for Italian leather shoes. Jake stood beside him, nodding solemnly, his contractor's hands surprisingly clean for once. Neither of them looked my way. The crowd began to thin, pickup trucks and sedans pulling away from the gravel road that led to Riverside Cemetery. I remained by the grave, my calloused fingers wrapped around a handful of soil. Dad had taught me that you always say goodbye properly to the land and the people who worked it. "You coming back to the house, Tommy?" Jake called out, his tone suggesting it was more obligation than invitation. I looked up at them, my younger brothers who'd grown tall and prosperous while I'd stayed bent over the same fields that raised us all. "I'll be along." They exchanged a glance I pretended not to catch, then walked toward Marcus's BMW. The engine purred to life, so different from the rumble of Dad's old Ford that still sat in the barn. As their taillights disappeared, I pressed the soil to my lips and whispered, "I'll take care of things, Dad, just like I always have." I had no idea how much that promise would cost me. The law office smelled like leather and disappointment. I sat in a chair that had seen better decades, my work clothes feeling out of place among the mahogany and brass fixtures. Marcus adjusted his tie for the third time, while Jake drummed his fingers against his knee, both of them radiating the impatience of men with important places to be. Mr. Hartwell, Dad's lawyer for 30 years, cleared his throat and opened the manila folder that held our father's final wishes. His weathered hands shook slightly as he unfolded the document. "Gentlemen, your father's will is straightforward," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent delivering news both good and devastating. "To my sons Marcus and Jake, I leave the house and its immediate grounds, along with my personal effects and vehicles." Marcus smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Jake leaned back in his chair, satisfaction rolling off him like heat from summer asphalt. "To my son Thomas," Hartwell continued, and I felt my stomach clench, "I leave the barn, the workshop, and—" He paused, squinting at the document, "and the responsibility of maintaining the property." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my boots, feeling the familiar burn of being the afterthought, the spare son who'd never quite measured up. Marcus chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Well, that's settled then," he said, standing and straightening his jacket. "Tommy, you can keep doing what you've always done, taking care of the place while the adults handle the important stuff." Jake laughed, slapping my shoulder hard enough to sting. "Don't worry, little brother. We'll let you keep your tools." They left me sitting there, drowning in the certainty that I'd inherited exactly what I'd always had, nothing. The barn had been my refuge as a child, a place where Dad taught me to fix engines and mend broken things. Now it would be my home, and the irony tasted bitter as old coffee. I dragged my belongings across the yard while Marcus and Jake moved into the house like conquering generals claiming their spoils. The barn's upper loft had been converted years ago into a basic living space. Dad's project during one of his optimistic phases when he thought we might need housing for seasonal workers. A single bed, a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a bathroom that barely qualified as such. The walls were thin enough that I could hear mice scurrying between the boards, and the October wind found every gap in the weathered siding. "This is perfect for you," Marcus had said, surveying the space with the air of a landlord inspecting a property. "Close to your work, quiet, plenty of space for your projects. He gestured at my collection of half-restored motorcycles and farming equipment like they were evidence of some character flaw. Jake had nodded along, already calculating how they'd convert Dad's workshop into something more profitable. That first night, I lay on the narrow mattress listening to laughter drift from the house. They'd invited friends over. City friends who'd never worked a day with their hands, who saw the ranch as a quaint weekend retreat rather than a living, breathing entity that demanded respect and understanding. The barn creaked around me like an old ship in a storm, and I pulled Dad's worn quilt up to my chin. Through the single window, I could see the warm glow of the house where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to walk and talk and dream of someday taking over the family legacy. Now I was a tenant in my own childhood, paying rent with my silence and labor. "We need to talk about expectations," Marcus announced the next morning, finding me in the workshop where I was rebuilding the engine on Dad's old tractor. He held a clipboard, because of course he did. Everything in Marcus's world required documentation and official procedures. Jake stood behind him, arms crossed, playing the role of enforcer. They'd dressed down for this meeting, Marcus in khakis and a polo shirt, Jake in clean jeans and a button-down. Their version of casual still cost more than I made in a month. "The property needs maintenance," Marcus continued, consulting his notes. "Fence repairs, equipment upkeep, general groundskeeping. We're prepared to offer you a fair wage for these services." I wiped my hands on an oil-stained rag, buying time to process the magnitude of what they were proposing. "You want to hire me to maintain my own family's land?" "It's our land now," Jake corrected, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "And you're living here rent-free, so it seems like a reasonable arrangement." The numbers they offered were insulting, barely enough to cover food and fuel, let alone any hope of independence. But what choice did I have? I was 43 years old with no formal education beyond high school, no savings, and nowhere else to go. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ashes. "But I do the work my way, on my schedule." Marcus made a note on his clipboard. "Within reason. We'll need regular progress reports." They left me standing in the workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had once represented possibility. Now they felt like the bars of a prison I'd helped build with my own hands. Outside, I could hear them discussing plans for the house, renovations, updates, maybe even a pool. Days blurred into weeks, each one a masterclass in humiliation. I rose before dawn to tend the animals they'd decided to keep for authenticity, fixed fences they'd damaged with their city friends' ATVs, and maintained equipment they used without understanding or respect. Marcus had installed security cameras around the property, ostensibly for safety, but positioned to monitor my movements. Jake had taken over Dad's office, filling it with blueprints for developments that would carve up our pastures into suburban lots. "Tommy!" Marcus would call from the house's back porch, his voice carrying the imperious tone of someone who'd forgotten we shared the same blood. "The north fence is sagging again. Can you get that fixed today?" I'd nod and add it to the endless list of tasks that kept me busy from sunrise to sunset. They paid me every 2 weeks, handing over the check with the air of benefactors supporting a charity case. The worst part wasn't the work. I'd always worked hard. It was the way they'd erased our shared history, treating me like hired help rather than the brother who'd stayed when they'd left for college and careers. I was the one who'd helped Dad through his heart attack, who'd sat with him during the long nights when the pain medication wasn't enough. Evenings were the hardest. I'd sit in the barn, eating canned soup and listening to their dinner parties through the thin walls of my exile. Their guests would ask about the caretaker, and my brothers would explain my presence with the casual dismissal reserved for furniture or livestock. Some nights, I'd walk the property boundaries, checking fence lines and gates by moonlight. The land knew me, recognized my footsteps and the way I moved through its rhythms. It was the only thing that still felt like home. 3 months into my new life as the family disappointment, I was cleaning out the workshop storage room when my crowbar punched through what I'd assumed was solid wall. Behind the rotted boards, I found a space I'd never known existed. A hidden compartment Dad had built into the barn's original structure. My flashlight beam revealed a metal filing cabinet, its green paint faded but the lock still solid. Dad had always been paranoid about important documents, a habit formed during the farm crisis of the 80s when banks foreclosed on neighbors with ruthless efficiency. The key was exactly where I expected it to be, taped under the workbench drawer where Dad kept his most trusted tools. My hands shook as I opened the cabinet, expecting to find old tax records or equipment warranties. Instead, I found a manila envelope marked, "Thomas, open only after my death," in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside was a document that made my knees buckle, a will, dated 6 months after the one Hartwell had read, properly witnessed and notarized. But this wasn't just any will. It was a complete revision that left everything to me. The house, the land, the equipment, everything. Attached was a letter in Dad's handwriting. "Son, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and your brothers have shown their true colors. I always knew you were the one who understood what this place means." The other will was a test. I wanted to see if they'd do right by you. The cameras I had installed will show you the truth of their character. Use this knowledge wisely. My hands trembled as I read the legal language that made me the sole heir to everything my brothers had claimed. But more than that, I found evidence that Dad had been recording their conversations, documenting their plans to sell the ranch and their treatment of me. For the first time in months, I smiled. I spent the next week in a strange state of suspended animation, going through the motions of my servitude while my mind raced with possibilities. The real will sat hidden in my toolbox, wrapped in oilcloth like a secret weapon, waiting for the right moment to be deployed. Dad's recordings were damning. Hours of Marcus and Jake discussing how to handle the Tommy problem, planning to evict me once they'd established legal ownership, laughing about my naivety in accepting their arrangement. The worst was Jake's voice, casual and cruel. "He's too stupid to know he's being screwed. Always has been." But I wasn't stupid. I was patient. Dad had taught me that the best revenge was success, and success required timing. I began documenting everything: their treatment of the animals, their neglect of essential maintenance, their plans to subdivide the ranch. I photographed the damage they'd caused, recorded their conversations about selling to developers, and carefully noted every violation of the agricultural zoning that protected our land. Marcus had grown bolder in his contempt, leaving me lists of increasingly menial tasks. "Clean the gutters," one note read. "Wash the windows, polish the silver." He was treating me like a servant, and I let him, knowing that every humiliation was building toward a reckoning. Jake had started bringing his contractor friends around, walking the property with measuring tapes and surveying equipment. They talked about me like I wasn't there, discussing how to clear out the barn and relocate the caretaker once the development plans were approved. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the simple brother who didn't understand the complexities of business and law. Let them underestimate me. Let them think I was broken. They had no idea what was coming. The confrontation came on a gray November morning when I found Jake's crew dumping construction debris in the pasture where Dad used to graze his prize cattle. Broken concrete, twisted rebar, and chemical-stained lumber scattered across grass that had fed 3 generations of livestock. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice carrying across the field. Jake emerged from his truck, hard hat in hand, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "It's temporary storage. We needed somewhere to put the demo waste from the Henderson project. This is pasture land. You can't dump construction waste here." "I can do whatever I want," he shot back, his face flushing red. "It's my land now, remember? You're just the hired help." Marcus appeared from the house, drawn by our raised voices. His expression was cold, calculating. the look of a man who'd grown tired of pretending to care about family bonds. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and found it tedious. "Your brother seems to think he has a say in how we use our property," Jake said, spitting the word brother like it tasted bad. Marcus sighed, the sound of a patient man dealing with a difficult child. "Tommy, we've been generous letting you stay here, but if you can't respect our authority, maybe it's time to make other arrangements." The threat hung in the air between us, sharp and final. I looked at my brothers, these men who'd shared my childhood, who'd learned to ride horses and drive tractors on this same land, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. "Other arrangements," I repeated slowly. "There's a trailer park in town," Marcus said, his voice gentle with false kindness. "I'm sure we could help with the deposit." I nodded, swallowing the rage that threatened to choke me. "I understand." But I didn't understand their cruelty. I understood their greed. I waited until Thanksgiving when they'd invited their city friends for a weekend celebration. The house buzzed with laughter and the clinking of expensive wine glasses, while I sat in the barn, listening to them toast their good fortune and bright futures. "To Dad," I heard Marcus say through the thin walls, "who taught us the value of hard work and family loyalty." The irony was so thick I could taste it. At exactly 8 o'clock, I walked across the yard and knocked on the front door. The door I'd entered freely for 43 years, until 3 months ago. Marcus answered, his face flushing with embarrassment at my unexpected appearance before his guests. "Tommy, what are you doing here? We're in the middle of dinner." "I need to speak with you and Jake. Both of you. Now." Something in my voice must have warned him, because his expression shifted from annoyance to uncertainty. "Can't this wait until tomorrow?" "No," I said, stepping past him into the house that still smelled like Mom's apple pie recipe and Dad's pipe tobacco. "It can't." The dining room fell silent as I entered, 8 faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Jake half rose from his chair, his hand moving instinctively toward his phone. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart, "I have something that belongs to you." I pulled the manila envelope from my jacket and placed it on the table, right next to the turkey that had once been Dad's favorite part of the holiday. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, but his voice had lost its authority. "Open it," I said. "Both of you. Together." The room held its breath as my brothers opened the envelope and read the document that would change everything. I watched their faces drain of color, saw the moment when understanding hit them like a physical blow. "This is impossible," Jake whispered. "Read the date," I said quietly. "Read the witnesses. Read the notary seal." "This is fake," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. His hands shook as he held the will that made me sole heir to everything they'd claimed. "You forged this somehow." I pulled out my phone and played the first recording, their voices clear and damning, discussing how to handle the Tommy problem and their plans to sell the ranch to developers. The dinner guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their plates fascinating. "Dad knew," I said simply. "He knew exactly who you were, and he tested you. You failed." Jake's face had gone from red to ashen. "The other will was bait," I finished. "Dad wanted to see if you'd do right by me, if you'd honor the family bonds that meant everything to him. Instead, you turned me into a servant in my own home." I played another recording, this one of Jake laughing about my stupidity, calling me too dumb to know I was being screwed. The sound echoed through the dining room like a confession in church. 3 months, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. 3 months you treated me like hired help, like I was nothing more than a convenient caretaker for property you planned to destroy. You dumped construction waste in Dad's pasture. You invited strangers to mock the land that raised us all. Marcus tried to recover his composure, slipping back into lawyer mode. "Even if this is legitimate, you can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. And I will. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Both of you." The silence that followed was deafening. One of their guests cleared his throat and mumbled something about needing to leave early. Within minutes, the dining room had emptied except for the three of us and the ruins of their Thanksgiving celebration. "Tommy," Jake said, his voice breaking, "we're family." "No," I replied, gathering up the documents. "Family doesn't treat family like you treated me. Family doesn't plan to destroy everything their father built." I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "You can sleep in the barn tonight. I'll be in the house." The legal battle lasted 6 weeks, but it was a foregone conclusion. Dad's will was ironclad, witnessed by the bank president and the county clerk, notarized by someone who'd known our family for decades. Marcus hired expensive lawyers who charged by the hour to tell him what I'd known from the moment I found the document. He had no case. Jake tried a different approach, showing up at the barn one evening with tears in his eyes and apologies on his lips. "I was wrong," he said, his voice thick with emotion that might have been genuine. "We both were. But we can fix this, can't we? We're brothers." I looked at him standing in the doorway of the space where I'd lived like an exile for 3 months and felt nothing but tired sadness. "Where were those tears when you were laughing about my stupidity? Where was that brotherhood when you were planning to evict me?" "I was angry about Dad's death," he said. "We all were." "People say things. People reveal who they really are," I corrected. "You revealed yourselves perfectly." The eviction notice was served on a cold December morning. I watched from the house, my house now, as they loaded their belongings into a moving truck. Marcus maintained his dignity, directing the movers with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. Jake looked broken, defeated, like a man who'd finally understood the true cost of his choices. Neither of them said goodbye. I found myself standing in Dad's office, surrounded by the blueprints and development plans they'd left behind. With methodical satisfaction, I fed them into the fireplace, watching their dreams of suburban subdivisions turn to ash and smoke. The ranch was mine now, all of it. The house, the land, the responsibility, and the legacy. But more than that, I had something my brothers would never possess. The knowledge that I'd earned it through loyalty, patience, and love for something bigger than myself. Spring came early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that felt like absolution. I stood in the same pasture where Jake had dumped his construction waste, now clean and green with new grass. The land had healed itself, as it always did when given the chance. The ranch ran differently under my ownership. I hired local kids who needed work, teaching them the same skills Dad had taught me. I restored the old equipment, brought back the cattle, and turned the place into what it had always been meant to be: a working ranch, not a weekend playground for people who'd forgotten where they came from. Marcus had moved back to the city, throwing himself into his law practice with the single-minded focus of a man trying to outrun his mistakes. Jake had taken a job with a construction company in another state, starting over at an age when most men were thinking about retirement. I heard about them through mutual acquaintances, fragments of information that painted pictures of lives rebuilt on foundations of regret. Marcus had divorced, his wife citing his obsession with work and his inability to connect with their children. Jake had started drinking, though he'd supposedly gotten help for that. Sometimes I felt sorry for them. They'd lost more than property and money. They'd lost their connection to the place that had shaped them, the land that held the bones of their ancestors and the dreams of their father. But sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford. They'd made their choices with clear eyes and calculating hearts. The house felt different now, filled with the sounds of life instead of the hollow echoes of people playing at being something they weren't. I'd kept Dad's office exactly as he'd left it, down to the coffee ring stains on his desk, and the calendar still turned to the month he died. 1 year after the reading of the false will, I sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch spread out before me like a promise kept, every fence line straight, every pasture green with purpose. A truck pulled into the driveway, and I recognized the driver before he stepped out. Marcus, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. He approached the porch with the careful steps of a man walking on uncertain ground. "Hello, Tommy," he said, his voice stripped of its old authority. "Marcus." I didn't invite him to sit, but I didn't tell him to leave either. "The place looks good," he said, his eyes taking in the restored barn, the healthy cattle, the general air of prosperity that came from land being loved instead of exploited. "It should. It's being cared for properly." He winced at that, understanding the implication. We stood in silence for a long moment, two men separated by more than the porch steps between us. "I came to apologize," he said finally. "Not because I want anything, but because I need to say it. We were wrong. I was wrong about everything." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but found only exhaustion and genuine regret. "Why now?" "Because I've had a year to think about what we lost. Not the money or the property, what we really lost." He gestured at the ranch, at the legacy we'd all inherited and only I had preserved. "Dad was right about you. He was right about everything." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. I thought about the months of humiliation, the casual cruelty, the way they'd erased our shared history with such calculated efficiency. But I also thought about Dad, about the man who'd taught us all that family meant something, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "I can't give you the ranch back," I said quietly. "I'm not asking for it," Marcus replied. "I'm asking for forgiveness." The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving us in the gentle darkness of a spring evening. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the wind carried the scent of new grass and possibility. "Come back next Sunday," I said finally. "For dinner. We'll see how it goes." He nodded, tears tracking down his cheeks, and walked back to his truck without another word. As his taillights disappeared down the gravel road, I remained on the porch, thinking about second chances and the long, difficult work of rebuilding trust. The ranch would always be mine now, that was certain. But maybe, just maybe, family could be something more than blood and shared history. Maybe it could be choice, forgiveness, and the willingness to start over. Dad would have liked that idea, I thought. He always believed in the possibility of redemption, in the power of the land to heal what seemed broken beyond repair. I stood up, brushing dust from my jeans, and walked inside to start planning Sunday dinner.